I think that really we should think of all these little parks along the East River as connected with Gateway National. And kids and people could take the ferry up from Gateway National and come to Brooklyn Bridge State Park and come to Bushwick Inlet Park and come to Transmitter Park and come to a park on the Newtown Creek and then over to Long Island City. I just really think that this waterway is such a beautiful natural resource. It's got tides, it's got currents. We can bring back things like oysters. And I just think that a city as big and great as New York needs to have green space as beautiful and big as the city itself.
There are so many interests in the environmental improvement of a place like Newtown Creek. There's working waterfront access points that crumbling bulkheads have prevented businesses from bringing barges in for years. There's ways to build bulkheads that bring back oysters and fisheries and build new habitat and still allow for a working waterfront. There's opportunities for education and parks and open space for communities in Brooklyn and Queens that have never had waterfront access and open space. And all of these things combine to make our city better. And so there are so many interests in a clean, healthy, restored Newtown Creek that we're going to get there regardless of what's going on in Washington.
I started participating in 1996. That's when I jumped in. And there was a lot going on. I mean, the oil spill, the sewage treatment plant, the development plant. The community started asking for open space. I and some people that I knew had projects for opening up the land and the waterfront that had been fenced off for a very long time, and the community had no access to it. Phyllis Jampolsky had a group that wanted to restore the pool, McCarran Park Pool. Had been closed for years. We wanted to open that up forever and ever and ever. There was a group called WATERWAYS and Green Views, and they wanted to develop composting programs. But the same group that worked with George Trackus at the end of Greenpoint Avenue.
The WNYC transmitter tower was right there. So it was a city-owned parcel of land, this thing about who will give us the land so that we could have a park. So the city was able to take their own land and turn it into a park. But it's only 1 little acre. And so on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday, when the weather gets beautiful, it's really not even that pleasant anymore, because an acre for this kind of density, feel this breeze. In the summertime, the breeze is like this. So everybody wants to be there. People have their babies on the grass. People have their dogs on the grass. People are angry with each other. And my thing is, yeah, of course, because it's 1 acre. People need more space to relax.
They promised a 28-acre park 11 years ago in exchange for these towers. And they changed the zoning, did not purchase the land, and it's gone up in value exponentially, but still needs to be the park.
Bloomberg administration rammed through a rezoning resolution for the Greenpoint Williamsburg waterfront. They rezoned about 185 blocks that would just promote, crazy amount of luxury residential buildings, especially towers on the waterfront, and increasing the population by thousands. So they promised creating about 50 acres of open space on the waterfront, and the center of that would be Bushwick Inlet Park, which would be 27 acres.
Our whole chant, our whole rant, our whole focus is, this is not a gift. This is not a gift from the Parks Department. This is not a gift from Mayor de Blasio. This is not a gift from New York City. This was a transaction. This was a deal made when the city went and took 185 blocks on both sides of this and rezoned it for residential and let the developers come in like sharks and have their way.
Most of the properties were part of the manufactured gas and original oil refinery industries in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. So there is coal tar and numerous, volatile organic chemicals, as byproducts of that, and oil refinery that's down there, and then there's the base, what's called the Bayside Fuel site, is where there are massive dormant oil tanks.
And it's all contaminated. And what they're wondering is if, when they do acquire this piece of property, when, if, or whoever does get it, and how polluted it is underneath, because they have no access to test it. Right where this blue area is what was on fire a year ago, for 6 weeks, and it was another warehouse next to this one. And now the property is for sale. Norman Brodsky is trying to sell it to the highest bidder. He built on the land knowing that it was a promised park, and the city didn't buy it then, and that's too bad, but they still need to acquire it now before it goes to developers. Well, we've had a rally at City Hall. We've finally gotten the mayor to even address the situation. We've had a rally on the property. We've had a flash mob. We've had a Occupy the Inlet with kayaks and canoes and a sailboat come from the water side, and then all people in a bit of a rally on the land side, just all to bring attention to this. So we go to a lot of meetings, and we're not going to stop until we have our park.
Borough President Eric Adams had this idea. He said, I really think we should have a sleepover in the park. If you don't build it, we're coming anyway. We're in such need of a park. Other politicians came earlier in the evening and then left, but Carolyn Maloney, the congresswoman, and Borough President Eric Adams, they slept here on this concrete in tents all night. And that was in the New York Times. So that's why I say I think it was a marker in our fight that, whoa, these people are serious. They're out there in the pouring buckets of rain.
There's lots of sites here in Greenpoint and Williamsburg that have underground contaminants, where for decades, or really sometimes a century or more, different businesses have been dumping pollutants onto the ground, and they've been seeping into the soil and going into the groundwater. And now what we're seeing is, if we look around here, is there's lots of new construction, and what they've done in many instances is they've had to remediate because there's been contaminants in the soil and the groundwater and the soil gas.
So the Brownfield Opportunity Area Planning Study is funded by New York State. This is a statewide program that they offer to help communities plan constructive use and reuse for blighted and contaminated properties.
This Brownfield Opportunity Area was conducted to state standards. It is now designated, and therefore any project that happens in the area that meets the goals of the plan can be eligible for additional brownfield cleanup tax credits.
The brownfield standards are pretty rigorous in terms of cleanup or capping. The city wants to rebuild on brownfields because those are already developed sites, and rather than take over undeveloped sites, we should try to preserve open green space as it is and rebuild on already developed sites.
Newtown Creek Superfund site hasn't yet begun the dredging process because they haven't yet figured out what they're going to do. Right now we're at a very critical time for Newtown Creek Superfund because we are finishing up the city, the state, and the federal agencies are finishing up their assessment of really what their idea of the risks to the ecosystem are, to the people of the community, and what they're going to do about it as the cleanup progresses.
In 2010, Newtown Creek and Gowanus both got designated federal Superfund sites. Gowanus is on a much quicker track to get cleaned up. How do you expedite those processes is pressure from the community level as well as from a city level. Gowanus is very different in that there's a lot more residential development going on. There's a lot more people living and breathing, you know, right next to it. And I feel like we need to have more of that here in Newtown Creek.
The focus of the city really has been for many, many years now these two Superfund sites, the Gowanus Canal and Newtown Creek. And so if you're working on waters in New York, you're working with the communities around these two hotbeds of toxic pollution, and no better partner in this region than the Newtown Creek Alliance, North Brooklyn Boat Club, and really dozens of other community groups in Greenpoint, Long Island City, and all over Newtown Creek.
I work for Newtown Creek Alliance, which is a community nonprofit dedicated to restoring and revealing and revitalizing Newtown Creek.
When you paddle in the city, you've got, you know, big tugboats and ferry boats, and you're kind of in the ocean, and the city's there, and it's beautiful, and it's nice, and it's exciting to be out on the waterways in the city.
What I'm doing is pursuant to Alberti's statement about architecture, saying that a good city, which an architect designs, has clean air, viable water, good quality water, good urban planning.
Our first patrol into Newtown Creek was in 2002, and when we came up, there were vehicles in the water, there were petroleum spills and barrels everywhere, people that hadn't seen the water of Newtown Creek in decades. And we started working with the communities and building this record of this photographic and video-based record of all the pollution that was at the time oozing into the creek. That's where really the impetus behind the ExxonMobil Greenpoint oil spill litigation popped up. We started working with the Attorney General's office in 2002 and 3 and 4 to try to get a handle on all of these decade-old legacy pollution issues. And from there, we've seen immeasurable improvement, but we still have a very long way to go.
If we could do a small raft with some kelp, just to see if, for example, when salinity changes, what happens to the kelp. I did go with my colleague Coleen Fitzgibbon, with Patterson, Beckwith, and with Willis, Elkins, from the North Brooklyn Boat Club, along the shore, by boat.
This is a navigational channel. It's like 25 feet deep here. And then you have a layer of sludge that's about 10 to 15 feet. It's essentially like an artificial, it's accumulated, that has some of the heavy contaminants in it. But also there are certain areas, like where we are now, this isn't really that contaminated, the sediment. It's much when you go further back in. In CA, we've always been interested in is the tributaries.
Oh, right.
You have Dutch Kills, which unfortunately the water's too high. We can go near it. Water's too high to get in there. Then Whale Creek.
You say too high?
Because there's a really low bridge, yeah. And Maspeth Creek, East Branch, and English Kills. So I'm just gonna take a measurement here. There's a meter here, and so it has there's different factors on it. There's dissolved oxygen, salinity, temperature. But yeah, it's a standard sort of multi-parameter meter.
We've been working on a project for several years where we measure dissolved oxygen. Originally, the instrument was used and it was dragged behind a canoe. But what we found is that in order to be able to compare our measurements with measurements being taken by regulatory agencies and others, we needed to take a stationary measurement. And so we're going to set up a station at the North Brooklyn Boat Club where we measure dissolved oxygen all year long, every day, every minute.
Historically, what this whole area was like with this marsh, and how we just totally lost it. So here's a cool project over here. See the silver boxes in between? This is Professor Durand we work with at LaGuardia. She's really interested in ways that we can bring back some of the salt marsh grasses. And so there's an idea of basically making a planter, and you put it along as a bulkhead, a flat edge, which is what most of the creek is. And then they sit at the same elevation they would naturally. So at high tide, their roots are able to get water from the rising tide, and then the rest of the time they sit dry like they would in a natural marsh. This is the project we did called the Living Dock, because the creek has really been turned into this bathtub with these straight walls. So we've been finding ways that we see oysters and mussels coming back and finding little crevices to live in. Is there other ways we can design habitat for them? Each crate has like a different habitat, if you will. And so this one, so this is old clamshells. So we're seeing if there's oysters or mussels that will affix to the shells. It acts like a reef, so that there's like fish and shrimp is actually the most common thing. Amphipods and smaller plankton. The exciting thing is we have seen a couple mussels attach themselves to some of these shells. An oyster, can clean like 30 gallons of water a day. This is actually the best one for fish and shrimp. There's a fish right there. So yeah, in the summer, lots and lots of fish, but yeah, small little guy. And this water is so green right now. This is really abnormal. The visibility is like 8 inches or something here. It's just a bloom of an algae that's really going nuts. My guess is that the dissolved oxygen is going to be really, really high. There's not a lot of active seepage coming in like there used to be, which is a big issue. But, up until 10 years ago, there was oil still coming in off the shore into the creek. So,
what stopped it?
Legal action, essentially. Riverkeeper filed a lawsuit, and then the state also. Essentially, Exxon has been cleaning it up since it was discovered in the late 70s. And then it got to a point when Riverkeeper started coming down and doing patrols in the early 2000s, and they just said, wow, this is really not great. And so there was a couple lawsuits, and the big one was really also much of members from the community signed on to say, you're not doing a good enough job. And so that led to more enforcement of the cleanup. It's really the state coming down with a hammer to make them do a more...
West or New York?
New York State. Okay. They're the ones who oversee the cleanup, so they've been really doing more enforcement and regulation of the cleanup. It's complicated because the creek itself is under federal designation for cleanup. The Greenpoint oil spill on land is under state jurisdiction.
So what happens when you go from land to the sea?
They have to have a lot of conversations and figure that out. If there was a plume of oil underneath the ground and they discovered through the Superfund investigation that it was seeping into the creek, then they could address that upland source.
Something's going to take years to grow something and take it out. My interest in the river is to get the contaminants out tomorrow. And if that's mechanical dredging, that's mechanical dredging, because these contaminants pose a present, current, and expansive risk to the public health issues, the ecosystem itself. There's fish that are toxic and going to be toxic for decades to come from Superfund sites from here all the way up to the Upper Hudson. This stuff needs to come out now. And so there's definitely places and there's definitely ideas that can help with bioremediation throughout the entire New York Harbor. But in places that are like Newtown Creek and Gowanus Canal, that are the largest, most toxic, contaminated waterways in the entire country, we need to clean this stuff now. We need to get it out tomorrow.
For the Superfund cleanup of the creek, there's 6 responsible parties, and that's 5 corporations: Exxon, BP, Phelps Dodge, National Grid, and Chevron. And so, and then the city of New York. The 5 corporations have sort of formed their own entity called the Newtown Creek Group, all these major billionaire corporations in the city of New York, essentially the DEP. The way our sewer system is designed is that we dump all the sewage into the waterways whenever there's a rainstorm.
A CSO is a combined sewer overflow, and it's one of the pipes where, when it's raining, the combined effluent of stormwater as well as the sewage coming down our toilets and showers and drains and everything is flushing out to the waterways. And so New York City has this combined sewer system, and we have over 450 of these pipes throughout the city, releasing billions of gallons of untreated sewage and stormwater every year.
East side below 70th Street, and then the west side below like 20th Street. So like all of Lower Manhattan sewage comes to this treatment plant.
How do they get it over there?
There's a big pipe running underneath the East River, yeah.
So it doesn't just dump untreated into the water?
When it rains, it does, though, because when it rains, you have all the runoff from the street goes to the same system. The treatment plant hits capacity, and so it backs up. So that Manhattan pipe, the pipe that goes from Manhattan to this treatment plant, if it's raining, they'll just shut that pipe off, and then they'll open up all these outfalls, like on the east side of Manhattan into the East River.
Some of the easiest things to do are the stormwater management, and that addresses the combined sewer overflow problem that we have and is plaguing all of our waterways around the city. And that has to do with creating absorptive surfaces that take that water before it hits the catch basins and the stormwater treatment plants. We are working with big housing organizations to do it on a grand scale, especially green roofs. So green roofs that capture the first 1 inch of rainfall and delay it so it doesn't hit the stormwater system at the peak moments when everything else is reaching that system at the same time. The system can't handle it, and it releases untreated sewage into the waterways.
With Newtown Creek Alliance, we've been working on bioremediation and micromediation. So looking at different fungi that either break down petroleum-based products, but also other naturally occurring microorganisms that can break down things even like lead. There's a huge amount of oxygen in the water, which sounds like a good thing, except that we know it's coming from these algae blooms. And the downside about that is that these algae only survive a certain amount of period of time, and when they die off, they decompose and take a lot of that oxygen with them. So the creek, some of the big issues with the creek is the oxygen is always out of balance, going up and down. So you have really high highs and really low lows. And the really low lows are detrimental because then it's hard for fish and other organisms to survive.
Eutrophication. That's eutrophication.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So when you have the sewage discharges particularly, you're getting all these nutrients pumped into the waterway. So the city, as a way to fix this dissolved oxygen level, is they've installed in parts of the creek an aeration system so that they manually oxygenate the water. And it runs during the summer because when there's hotter temperatures, there's less oxygen in the water. So it's a way for them to meet this standard so they can ensure that fish can survive here. Right. But it's a really short-sighted approach, and it doesn't address the real problem, which is the sewage coming in and the nutrient overload. For Professor Durand, this is like what she's really been focusing on. She's doing research at the lab at LaGuardia about how they can also reduce the sewage bacteria. So they have like really amazing results of where they take a sample from Dutch Kills after a rainstorm that's off the charts with awful bacteria. They'll do a control tank and a tank with rib mussels, and they test it after 12 hours, 24 hours, and just dramatic reduction. It's really cool. This is one of the older buildings on the creek. This was part of Charles Pratt's refinery, which eventually became Standard Oil. This is actually the spot where there has been some seepage coming out. There's some oil under the ground here. It's kind of a shame, though. That means one of the issues on the creek is that the cheapest, most effective way to shore up your property and prevent erosion and also contain anything like oil coming off of it is to put these steel bulkheads in, go really deep. And it's unfortunate because there's no potential for any habitat.
The bulkheads are definitely part of the problem. What we have in Newtown Creek are some old, crumbling bulkheads that are the perfect home for mussels and oysters and critters and habitat. And then we have new sheet pile steel bulkheads that are just flat, unapproachable walls for the marine environment. And in that case, one of those bulkheads might be better for shipping, another one might be better for habitat, but there exists out there third designs and fourth designs and fifth designs that can have both.
This is where they're doing most of the cleanup of the oil spill. The oil spills mixed in with this groundwater, and so throughout the whole neighborhood of eastern Greenpoint here, they pump the groundwater that has the oil in it, and they pump it at two different places, and one is this, the structure, the gray structure with the red lining on top. And so within there and next to it, they basically set up like a treatment facility so that they take the oil out of the water and are able to collect it. And then they discharge, if you see these bubbles coming in, they discharge the clean groundwater into the creek. They're cleaning stuff that's underground. They're taking oil out of the groundwater. This whole area, this is called the turning basin. So this is like the widest point in the creek. Right. So this is historically where the tankers would have to come all the way back here to turn around because the rest of it was too narrow. You can look on old maps. This was, of course, all marsh. Maspeth Creek was a really fantastic marsh. So the interesting thing about the turning basin is that it's also, this is where the sediment contamination appears to be the highest.
Oh, okay.
This is kind of like the hot spot. And it's partially because, I mean, you had the oil refiners up there, but this was all manufactured gas plants. And then you also had Phelps Dodge on the other side. So heavy metals and PCBs and coal tar and stuff. This is one of the contractors for Superfund cleanup.
So they have data.
They do have data, yeah. They collect it as part of the Superfund investigation, but they're hired by the people who are responsible for the pollution. And they're interpreting it as well. This is waste management, and those green things are going on a train. Sanitation comes with a curbside pickup. We put in a big pile and they put it in the green trains. And there's a line here that runs, yeah, railroad, and it runs out of the city. So that's our trash.
So once the EPA figured out what was wrong with the creek, and now that it's got a 10-volume set of information saying what the risks are to the ecosystem, now comes the time when the government is figuring out what the plan is going to be for getting all those toxics out of the environment and rebuilding what we should have had as a functioning watershed. In 2017, Riverkeeper is going to be launching on a large community-driven project to create a vision for Newtown Creek, to figure out exactly what the community wants to see for the restoration potential, the remediation outcomes, the recreation, and the climate resilience for our shared waterway. We're going to include the city, we're going to include the state, federal agencies, the industrial polluters, the working waterfront, the residents, the fishermen, the kayakers, the boaters, and everyone that has an interest in the creek.
The visioning process that Riverkeeper is going to be leading soon uses as its jumping off point the Brownfield Opportunity Area Plan that was put together by Newtown Creek Alliance, Greenpoint Manufacturing Design Center, and Riverkeeper through a New York State Brownfield Opportunity Area grant.
the polluters and the EPA get together and they put out a couple proposals. So it's incumbent upon the community now to start working with the agency to call for their own vision and to show the government what the community wants to see on the backside of this cleanup, what the creek should look like when the cleanup is over, and how we're going to get from here to there. Because right now, in 2017, that's when all these plans are getting written.
So eventually, all the waterfront will be connected. All the new development will be required to provide esplanade all along on the waterway. So, but if you start off at East River State Park, which is North 6, and then you keep going through East River State Park, and then you get to the Bushwick Inlet Park. And right now you've got the soccer field. Next to that is the city storage site. It's 11 acres. That was the parcel of land we were fighting for. So that'll be park, and that from Bushwick Inlet Park will be 27 acres in total. And it'll reach from the state park all the way down to the inlet and curve around the inlet. Then you're just going to have the little esplanades going down to Transmitter Park. Then you're going to have your little esplanades built out by the developers until you get to, I guess, Box Street Park and Barge Park, which is sort of at the mouth of the Newtown Creek. So now we're at the mouth of the Newtown Creek. We go around and you start reaching up the Newtown Creek on the Brooklyn side, and you get to the end of Manhattan Avenue. There's kind of a kayak launch there. Then you could keep going down and you're gonna have the North Brooklyn Boat Club. And then under the Pulaski Bridge, then you get to the park. That's where the sewage treatment plant is. It's a nature walk.
The last time we talked, we were in the fight and we were feeling discouraged, I think, because it was not looking good. The expense of this parcel of land was so enormous that it seemed like the city of New York would not possibly be able to afford it. And so the big change is now I'm standing here, and we got it, we won. The city of New York came forward with the money, and they bought the missing piece of the park. So we're very thrilled, we're very excited, we're very grateful that it turned out this way, because now there's going to be a beautiful park on the edge of this magnificent East River for future generations to come and relax and enjoy and look at this unbelievable view of New York City. I've had future generations in my mind all the time since I came to Greenpoint, because actually when his dad was my little baby, we never got to the edge. We never looked at the water. My favorite phrase is catch a breeze. With my son, we never could catch a breeze. So I sort of felt like, I have my second chance now to try to continue the fight to make Greenpoint and Williamsburg more open and friendly and healthier for all the people that live here.
It should be like a basic right, a New Yorker right, to have a beautiful park right in your neighborhood.
There's always the danger that you don't look far enough ahead. There are so many problems that are not properly being worked on. Pollution of the waters, pollution of the soil, pollution of the air. On the other hand, the happiest people I've ever known in my life were people that decided, let's see if we can solve this problem. Let's see if we can get people together and do things that have never been done before. And all around America, there's little organizations, parents getting their children together. Hey, it would be fun to do this. Let's get together, get some other people. You'll find joy working with other people. Who knows what you can do until you try.
There's a secret space where the East River intersects with Newtown Creek. Most people only see it from the street, if they're lucky. But there are a few of us that have been lucky enough to paddle around and see it from the water. Get a sense of calm when you're out on the water with the summer sun setting, with the summer wind brushing against your skin. You have a sense of serenity that washes over you, and it's a beautiful little secret that only a few of us know, but we hope that more people come out and experience it with us.
We came to see the boats today because they're beautiful and it's something that is really interesting to my son. And do you like the boats?
Yeah.
What do you like about them?
Everything.
everything. A lot when you're talking about science education, people talk about like gateway events, things that trigger the imaginations in kids and make them want to learn more. You know, you worry about, as a parent, raising a child in the city is that they're not going to have as much access to nature as somebody who would be living in the country. And this is one of the places that we can find nature. For him, this is nature. This is it. It's this in our community garden. It's the parks. It's all of those small pieces that make up a total picture. It's the generating of interest. It's like getting curiosity. That then gets us to look at books in the library about crabs, and we've seen jellyfish and striped bass. And so it's more like when you see the natural world and when you see art, this is gonna then make him look at what's a steamship, what's a paddle boat, how long would it take to get somewhere? All of these questions, I think it's the generating of interest.
So right here on the North Brooklyn waterfront in Greenpoint and Long Island City, where the Industrial Revolution really got rolling for America, the industries were all situated here because you needed the water to move things around. Everything moved by boats. The industries that we take for granted now were all creatures of this North Brooklyn and Long Island City waterfront. And after the Depression in World War II, the need for industries to be situated next to rivers and seafronts declined because of the trucking system that developed in the interstate highways of the 1950s, leaving these neighborhoods in a dilapidated, decayed state in the 60s and 70s. And the river really took the hardest hit of all through that whole process of the rise and fall of the industrialism. The river was treated as a tool for industry, and it was treated as a means of making money, a means of profiting and having jobs and developing economy.
So with Newtown Creek Alliance, one of our goals is to revitalize the creek, and that means economically, it means environmentally, and it also means from the community side. One way to do that is to actually have more places where people can access Newtown Creek. So there's about 11 miles of shore along the creek on Brooklyn and Queens side, but there's very few places where people can actually get to the water or are even encouraged to get to the water. So one of the things that we've been doing over the years is fighting for improved access so that people are aware that there's actually a waterway in their backyard, and there's something, that they take some ownership of that waterway and become a steward of it and help fight for the cleanup of that waterway.
Late as 2012, I'd say, there were still some folks in government who believed that this waterway was, well, essentially dead, as one engineer put it from the DEC. It was considered a walled-in waterway, largely bulkheaded, for industry with minimal public access and minimal access to be expected in the future. Well, the community has turned all that around. And it was being out on the water that we discovered, oh no, all these organisms are here that were always here. They just need a little space to live. Just a short walk east along the creek from the North Brooklyn Boat Club is the Nature Walk. And at the Nature Walk, children can actually walk into the intertidal zone because the artist who built this structure, George Trachis, he had a love for this ecosystem, and he has a love for education. So he made in his steps cutouts that act as little tide pools. So when the water passes, the low tide has receded, we are left with oases of water in which communities of organisms otherwise absent from the bulkheads have a living space. And that is how my students and I realized the creek is alive with life. This was the idea for bringing these communities into public view. To do that, we thought, well, let's develop a little ecology center, a little ed shed, a little place where people can come to see what we're seeing. We could set up a little tank and bring these animals and these plants into view and open this view to any classroom, any interested group from any business, any children in a summer program, anybody who would like to see what's just happening at their doorstep but just out of view. An aquarium for the estuary, where people can see what's just in their backyard but out of view, just under the water that they don't venture upon. We can bring it to them. But the main service of the boat club is being able to bring families onto the water. And it's really then, once you're on the water, that you appreciate the beauty and potential of Newtown Creek as part of our great New York estuary. So parents don't have to take their child on a trip outside of New York City to experience the natural world. Bring your children to nature here right in the backyard of Greenpoint, Brooklyn, Long Island City. Bring them to Newtown Creek. Bring them to see this growing, developing community of life that is being assisted by collaborative efforts of community members, North Brooklyn Boat Club volunteers, students from LaGuardia Community College, and all brought together under the umbrella of the Newtown Creek Alliance. Bring them on a canoe to see the bird life of the creek, to count the number of oysters and mussels that they see, to try to find out what the cormorant is diving for. It's right in your backyard.
You know, I think one of the really interesting things about being able to go boating in a canoe or a kayak or a rowboat on the East River, Newtown Creek, is that for a lot of people, there's a sense of rediscovering an environment, that there's the waterways around us are living spaces. There's fish that live there, there's mussels, there's plants, there's birds, there's all sorts of stuff. You can discover that there's an oyster here. There used to be millions of oysters in New York Harbor. I mean, it sort of says something about the longer trend of pollution in the city, but it also says something about connecting people, citizens, with the environment around us.
There are little alleyways called kills. There's Dutch kills, English kills, and these are little quiet offshoots of Newtown Creek. And you can paddle to them and then enter. And you will hear bird song. It will be very peaceful and can be windy out on the big river. But when you get into these little waterways off Newtown Creek, such as the English kills, the wind dies down, you hear the birds. You can sometimes see fish jumping to the water and making their little sounds as they leap to the top of the water. It's a very magical place.
Discovering new places in New York to find peace and quiet is very difficult. These ancient waters, which built New York City, have now become a place to reconnect with nature. You know, and then sometimes it's like exploring forbidden territories. Like, you can feel like you're the first person that's ever been someplace, finding a little corner of the estuary that's tucked away from regular people and even most boats. Newtown Creek is one of a few undiscovered corners of New York City to be by yourself and relax. One of the reasons I think that traveling or participating in nature here in the city is in some ways more profound than in a pure wilderness, because of the juxtaposition of natural beauty and man-made beauties. You know, we're surrounded by all these artifacts of the past, some of which have been maintained and some of which are aging and decrepit. I think it's really exciting that right here in my own neighborhood, I get to experience nature. New Yorkers think that they have to travel to some remote place for that kind of experience, but it's really right here. People are transformed when they encounter these forgotten corners of the waterfront. It's seeing our city from a new perspective.
The waterways of the world are precious to the whole human race. Whether it's a little mountain stream, a little trickling brook through a pasture land, or a huge river like the Amazon. And what a thrill it is to know that when the children are in a creek, they'll discover the life in the river, the different kinds of clams as well as the different kinds of fish, and the different kind of games you can play, skipping stones and so on. And how the waters in the creek are not yet as clean as they should be. And how we've got to work to get the government to pay the money to clean up those creeks. And who knows what miracles will happen in the next few years. We have time to sing a song or two. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island. From the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream wide. On the other side, it didn't say nothing. That side was made for you and me. That side was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island. From the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. Nobody living can ever stop me. As I go walking on Freedom Highway. Nobody living can make me turn back. Hey, this land was made for you and me. Everybody, this land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island. From the Redwood Forest Thanks very much. This is Pete Seeger signing off.
Hello, everybody. I'm Scott Fraser, friend of Bushwick Park member, and moderator of Willis.
You guys saw me in the films. For Newtown Creek Line. So yeah, I think we're going to moderate, and I think we have a couple of questions, but for the panelists, the filmmakers, and some of the people that are in the film, but I know I'm really interested too to answer questions, since I think most of us are kind of on the same page in terms of what's what. But so I don't know, Scott, if you have questions you want to kick it off with, or.
No, I think we want to make it as interactive as possible. So I open it up. Who wants to get things started with the first question? Raise your hand, don't be shy. Go ahead.
Is there an access way that is currently up for, as it were, or that you're currently either collectively or individually pushing for that needs more attention? Politically, so do you have a project in the works that you want help with?
Well, Willis is Newtown Creek Alliance, and so we have a Superfund site right in the heart of our neighborhood that desperately needs attention and needs to be cleaned up. And we're members of Bushwick Park, Friends of Bushwick Park. It's a brand new park that we've just gotten. Just a tiny little bit of background on that. The city finally came forward with $160 million announced on November 22nd of last year to complete the 27-acre Bushwick Park. So now we have 27 acres, which will be a world-class park. We called it the Central Park on the East River. And so it'll be a gathering place for everyone. And so that'll be a decade-long process to clean up that piece of property and make that come to life. I'm sure Willis can talk a little bit about the time span for the Superfund cleanup. And that's monumental as well. So those, I guess we can speak directly to those.
Yeah, I mean, there's not there's not a park that we're fighting for say on Newtown Creek, but there is, the Superfund process is going to be a pretty long one, and at some point there will be, a very active comment period. Right now it's this real kind of back and forth between the agencies, like Sean was describing, between EPA and the responsible parties trying to figure out what the damage is. The other thing that's really, that's happening, two things that are really happening right now on Newtown Creek that would be most useful to have more community input on. One is what's known as a long-term control plan. It's a really boring term, but it's the way that the city is going to address the sewage overflow that was discussed in the film. Currently the creek has over 1 billion gallons of sewage going into it, and it really impacts those, what we call those little tributaries. And it's actually not a huge problem for Greenpoint because where we are on the creek is really the cleanest part. But further back in East Williamsburg and Maspeth and Ridgewood, these places get inundated with large amounts of sewage. So right now the city is putting forth plans, and they are in the end of June going to submit this project, whatever they come up with, to the state. So we were just talking about this Newtown Creek Alliance. They had a presentation last week, and we're going to try to consolidate that. It's a lot of information, a lot of ideas they presented, and it could be upwards of $1 billion of investment to try to fix this problem. Huge infrastructure that they were talking about. So we're hoping that we can sort of distill this kind of technical conundrum of ideas and then get people to also submit comments on behalf of what we come up with. But long term, we really need
removal of the toxic sediments, but also, to stop the sewage that's going into places like Newtown Creek. So yeah, I actually have a question about, maybe Scott or Kim might talk about this, but there's the question about are there other parks? There was other parks that were promised as part of the 2005 rezoning, right, that we haven't acquired. Is there updates on?
I'm not completely up on all, when this rezoning happened, we were promised about 50 acres, as Steve said in the first film. And so there are various parks that go, there's smaller parks. Bushwick Park is the big one, but there are other smaller parks going north up to Newtown Creek. And we feel like we're not getting really the love that we really should be getting in terms of the full 50 acres. That's a whole nother discussion. But I thought maybe it'd be interesting to get you guys involved. So, Sarah, I thought maybe one thing you may talk about, you just got the GSEP grant. And so, and this is a wonderful project, and she can tell you about what she's doing.
Very good. Yes, there are two efforts, one on the Greenpoint side and one on the Long Island City side. So, and they're in early stages of development. So the grant that he was mentioning is to develop a plan for a tidal salt marsh, true tidal salt marsh, not just hanging habitats on the Gulf. But there are regions that could support a stand of salt marsh grasses, like a cordgrass that you see in Jamaica Bay. One of these is the little inlet that is immediately east of Whale Creek. Whale Creek is what runs through the nature walk. And the nature walk is going to be extended so that you can walk up along the water of Whale Creek and then turn east towards this little inlet that was once named the Public Basin. And it's on the other side of the wastewater treatment plant. So you can't see it directly from the nature walk, but ultimately you will be able to walk there. And that is exactly where we are in negotiations with Department of Transportation, Department of Sanitation, Economic Development Corporation, all have to get in the act because, as was mentioned in the films, there may be toxic sediments in this area. So you have to do an environmental site assessment. So we're at the stage of getting the permits to do the phase 2 environmental site assessment, which we think will allow us to proceed with then excavating some of that what is actually fill, and replace that with sand that can then support the salt marsh, tidal salt marsh, which in turn can support the mussels and the clams and all that life that you see accumulating in the little basins of the living dock, which is in that inlet, that same inlet. And in my wild dreams, I see an extension beyond what is planned for the nature walk to a little boardwalk. You take one out and all the those grasses and make it a public basin. And then on the up at the head of Dutch Hills, which is where the DEP is actually starting the first actual return of a little tidal salt marsh area for a little plot of grasses right at the base of this cement wall where a concrete company dumps on it, but we've all been surprised to see the grasses come back. So that little terminal basin, way at the head of the tributary Dutch Kills, where there is a large CSO emptying, is supporting a tidal salt marsh. And right next to that CSO is a massive old barge that needs to be removed. It's a rusting hulk that's been there for decades. So there needs to be community pressure to get that salvage removed, and then it's public access right there. If we can get that barge out, there is monies available through the City Parks Foundation to begin building a public access way. So we need to, first of all, block off a street that really isn't a street, belongs to the railway, the MTA, and then have that a continuous greenway down to the shoreline that is directly opposite this little salt marsh that is still thriving despite its abuse.
If I may say something, this person is an amazing person to work with, as well as Willis. because they made themselves available to Coleen and I to make these films, which are really hard to make, and to capture her magic on a camera and then edit it, and to let Willis talk about his passion is the reason we work so hard, and to bring a consolidated version of this story to you guys. Thank you. I have to thank you for all for coming, because without an audience, obviously, there's no reason for a film. And you guys make us feel so good when you applaud and you respond to what's going on. And Rosa is amazing because she's bringing us, our stories, to you and into the future. And this is the seeds of the future of Long Island City and Greenpoint. The effects of what's going on in these conversations won't be seen for 10 or 15 years, but when they do fully unleash themselves, this is probably going to be more amazing a place to live than anyone ever anticipated. So I just want to commend everybody on this panel for allowing me to talk this long.
No, we're honored. I think we're all honored by everyone here. I mean, it's we're all fighting for the same thing. And when you're on the water in these forgotten, forlorn little places, you see magic happen. And I guess it's captivated all of us, and we're all learning. Coleen, your film was so beautiful. I'd love you to talk a little bit about why you chose what you did and how you patiently documented. You've actually got an historic document now. You've got a turning point, I think, in our neighborhood. Yeah, and you guys, and so why don't you talk to us a little bit about what drew you?
Well, actually, Rosa had asked me if I would put in a film last year, and I don't know if she didn't like the other films, or she said, well, don't you have an environmental film? And I had done some environmental websites on the Great Lakes. So I was like, well, no, but I've always been interested in Newtown Creek. And Peter Fenn, who's a longtime collaborator, has a project that he had been talking to Willis and Patterson Beckwith about bringing kelp into Newtown Creek, or maybe even Bushwick Inlet Park, to also, like the oysters, clean the water. So Peter said he knew Willis, and the next thing we did is we took a very cold boat ride in the end of February. Luckily it was sunny and not too windy up the creek, and it was so beautiful. I mean, I couldn't get it all, but we did see birds, and we saw the dock. I mean, it was really great, and Willis is such a great speaker about it. And then this year, Rose asked for an update, and I hadn't really been thinking about that because I was working on another film. And so I got introduced through Dewey Thompson to Kim Fraser and Maggie Baker, and also then I met Michael Heimbinder and Catherine Thompson, and so interviewed them about the park. And it really seemed like, of course, that it was along, the East River flows into the Newton Creek and back out. And as Peter Fenn said, New York is really a fjord. So it was, you could see the connection, the land, the contaminated land, and the contaminated water. And as Kim said, someday it should all be a park that goes all the way around all the boroughs. Because actually, most of that land is extremely contaminated, because that's the area that they were bringing boats, the oil and the chemicals back and forth. They're dumping them in the water. So Kim, you want to say something about it?
Oh, well, I think I just have to say that I'm probably going to start, sobbing. I hope, no, don't worry about it. I just get really emotional about this.
Well, what's the future?
Well, first I have to tell you, this is the future. This is the future right now, because we moved here in 1982, to Greenpoint on Java Street. And when the boys out on the front of the street, we have one son, grown up now, had that baby that you saw in the movie. We were dragging these kids to the 197A planning sessions that were in the bottom of churches and banks, and so my son was always going because, you know, when you have parents who are like into the environment, you just have to go. He used to tell us, could you stop talking about the environment? And so I would try to collect some kids on the block so it would be more fun, so he wouldn't just have to be going along by himself with his parents. And I said to one little boy, I was trying to sell the Saturday trip, and I said, hey Billy, you want to come with us? We're going to go talk about the waterfront. And he said, he was about 8. He said, and his family's been here 3 generations. What's a waterfront? And it just, because I looked down the end of my block where the East River is, but at the time there was a big green warehouse, so you couldn't see water when you were coming home walking down the block. But that stuck with me so much because I thought, oh my God, these little kids, they're just on their stoop. Everyone's afraid to let them go very far where you can't see them because, you know, bad things are going to happen and bad things are happening on the waterfront. And now I feel like just everything that's going on, everything I saw in these 2 beautiful films, I can't really believe it happened because we were so discouraged back there in the 80s and then the 90s that a lot of my friends left. They were just too discouraged. I mean, they picked up and moved other places outside of the city because the environment was so oppressive and we were so scared that what we were breathing or what the kids were digging around in the backyard was toxic, and that as parents, young parents, you're like, oh God, I think I'm making a bad decision for my child, I'm polluting him. But anyway, that's why I'm so moved tonight, because I really feel like you both got the story and got the hope. And as a community person, now a grandma, I feel like one of the things that ties the water and the land together is this idea that we can get the people, we can get the families out on the water that is their waterfront, and they can just start to feel it, because really for generations here, people did not go near that waterfront. Like this little boy said, what's a waterfront? So I feel like now it's beginning. Now we have little points of contact with water, and from that can come everything else, because in the past you didn't even know, they didn't even know they were on a waterfront. So thank you so much. I was really moved by both movies. Thank you.
I have just hearing you talk about that, I thought it would be a good transition to another environmental issue, which is air quality. I know, Michael, that's something that you've worked on a lot, and it's not really discussed in the film. There's a lot of stuff about water and the soil as well, and I think the thing that's, we can kind of control a little bit our own exposure limits, especially to water, but also soil. And so, Michael, I'm wondering if you have a general synopsis of what the state of the air quality is in this neighborhood, and maybe how it's changed over the past. Like, we're seeing how some of these things have improved, if there's been improvements or there might be improvements, in years to come.
So we've been doing some air quality monitoring all around the city with a not-for-profit organization I run called Habitat Map. And Willis had a volunteer in a previous summer going around taking measurements in and around Newtown Creek, literally, I think, while paddling and also while walking around. And one of the big air quality concerns in Greenpoint and Williamsburg are all the waste transfer stations. So if you have a waste transfer station, you've got trucks. And Greenpoint is no stranger to trucks, because we've got trucks that come in with the waste, we've got trucks that come in with the heating oil and the gasoline and the ethanol, because there's several oil storage and distribution facilities. We've got warehouse facilities, we've got Fresh Direct. So there's so much trucking activity in the neighborhood that really lends itself to deteriorating air quality. And so one of the things we've been looking to do is that the cities, 10 years ago, they crafted a solid waste management plan and said that they were going to build marine transfer stations. So if you look at the history of air quality in Greenpoint, It certainly has improved since the days of industry and since the days when New York City, even until the early 90s, was incinerating garbage in apartment buildings. And there were 2 incinerators in Greenpoint. But the contamination net doesn't derive so much from big industry and manufacturing, but from waste transfer stations, oil storage, food storage and distribution. And so one of the things we're looking to do is basically, through the solid waste management plan the city put together, is to move that garbage and put it on rails. So one of the things you saw in the movie, Willis was narrating when they went by the waste management plant on English Kills, facility on English Kills, where they're putting that garbage and they're putting it on a train. And the city's doing the same thing where they're taking the garbage and they're putting it on barges. And so a single barge can carry as much garbage as 28 tractor trailer trucks.
Wow.
And so by doing things like railing our garbage out, barging it out, we can really reduce truck traffic in this neighborhood. So one thing just to put on people's radar is that the de Blasio administration last summer committed to zoning garbage in New York City, which means that if you're a commercial business, instead of being able to contract with any private carter to pick up your garbage, the city will carve the city up into zones and award franchises to certain private carters based on their, how low a cost is it, because that's a concern for the businesses, but also what's your environmental record and what's your labor record. And so this is something to keep on your radar coming forward, because it's going to have an impact on neighborhoods like Greenpoint in the South Bronx and Eastern Queens, which handle a lot of New York City's garbage.
Wait on. Yeah. Okay, the brilliance of the Hudson River Foundation, which basically gave me the grant to make this film, is they told me that I'm obligated to go to community centers, libraries, schools, and other. And the other is a really interesting thing, because what I've done is I've approached coffee houses, restaurants, bars, and all kinds of interesting commercial establishments that everybody sees development as a bad thing in Greenpoint and Long Island City, and to some extent it's not good. But if you incorporate something like an event where you show a film like these films at these places, and some people have actually brought up the possibility of looping the film on their video screens over like a 4-hour period at night, just letting people kind of see it and talk while they're seeing the film. And the essence of all of this is to simply get conversation going amongst the youngest people in society, because these are the people that are obviously inheriting everything that's been created. These are all legitimate things that have taken place over hundreds of years, and the earlier you get to younger people with these concepts of putting parks around the entire waterway and turning the whole city into this mecca of recreation, it sounds totally outrageous and idealistic, but when, as a filmmaker, you have to kind of come up with these outrageous, lofty aspirations and just go with it, which is the essence of my film. If you noticed, I tried to leave out most of the depressing pollution and just talk about Sarah's possibilities of all the putting mussels and oysters back into the water. These all seem like almost impossible dreams, but as long as you have people like Sarah and Willis and anyone else who wants to volunteer to get involved in these things, just like Pete Seeger says, anything is possible. And that's why I apologize if this seems so outrageous what he's saying, but this man went to his death believing anything good was possible if people, just as in the beginning of the film, it says when you get people together, that's what can happen if they have positive spirit.
Ben, go ahead. Amazing films. They're both really great, informational and emotionally, and enjoyed them wonderfully. But I have a sort of fondness for all little creatures covered in shells. So I was curious, like mussels and oysters. Are they doing any plans for them over the summer? Like any projects involving our friends?
Well, I have a wonderful thing to talk about. Is the Billion Oyster Project. Willis and I were on a boat with them in the dead of winter, and we're working at Friends of Bushwick Park with the Billion Oyster Project. to seed the Bushwick Inlet. The scientists of the Billion Oyster Project feel that this is the most fantastic habitat. They've been coveting it for a long time. We've always called the Bushwick Inlet the most significant ecosystem in North Brooklyn. And it's got a fascinating history. It used to go in all the way from the East River into McCarran Park. And there was a fork that went up towards Grand Street, and then there was a fork that went over towards Newtown Creek. And you couldn't get from Williamsburg to Greenpoint back in the old days. There was a really deep cut there. And so, to your point, the idea is that with the Billion Oyster Project, the oysters are like little wonderful water filtration plants. And they filter an amazing amount of water a day, each little oyster. So this summer, in the next coming months, they're going to start seeding Bushwick Inlet. And the dream is, again, all of our dreams is that will grow, and someday the East River will become a viable, much cleaner resource than it is now, thanks to the oysters.
Keep me up to date on that.
Peter.
I made a brief observation. Actually, at Coleen's request, I did harvest seaweed on the East River over by Bushwick Inlet, and it's very healthy and very vibrant. I don't know the full status of the whole population of seaweed in the area, but it does strike me that one could expand the seaweed industry such that you will also use it to harvest, as I do with a colleague from England, harvest contaminants. Because we saw the statement by Sean Dixon about the need to remove contaminants as soon as possible tomorrow. That will not be possible really with the current schedule of the government Superfund procedure, but I'm hoping that one could use seaweed to follow through the area and actually absorb contaminants as they might be there. I think the real challenge is, what is the status of the contamination? How bad is it? I do know from working in England that on some polluted industrial rivers, if you haul seaweed through the area, it will absorb contaminants, and that is if you will, plus at least for the habitat. The seaweed itself will die, but if you remove the contaminants on the site. So I think the possibility for multi-species industry is there, and I think that's important to realize about people. There are many homeless or poor people in New York City. They could work in this kind of activity, which would be very exciting because it's also in nature. It's dignified, so to speak, working with the habitat. Bear in mind, all the water here is coming in from Greenland and Labrador. We are receiving a very, very huge ocean current. We are not just New York City. We are, in fact, a final destination for water coming in from near the North Pole.
For one thing, as a potential, the tributaries of Newtown Creek are ideally suited to bring back what have been the lost hundreds and hundreds of acres of tidal salt marsh that spread through North Brooklyn and Long Island City. These were all meadows of grasses amongst the richest ecosystems on Earth. Amazingly, in a Superfund site, horseshoe crabs have come to reproduce. They've come up to the tributary of Dutch Girls, and we pulled out a little trilobite larva of a horseshoe crab, and a number of adults have been witnessed by people. And in fact, we think we saw a mom who got hung up on the riprap 2 months before we pulled out her larva. But to follow up with the mussels, as Willis mentioned, the most successful bivalve in Newtown Creek that Willis now and the NCA folks have surveyed and found throughout Newtown Creek, whereas the oysters are beginning to come in, presumably through all the oyster aquaculture in the Long Island Sound. They're coming in through East River and up. But the mussels have been there, we don't know, since we began looking. And they're all the way up in every nook and cranny of degraded bulkhead. And these animals, which are truly intertidal, the oysters are subtidal, And you can see them, they were in the film, they're packed in those little cutouts of the intertidal steps in the nature walk. They were shown back in a study in the late 80s to be able to filter better than any other bivalve, and they outshine oysters in this, nanoplankton, the smallest planktonic cells, bacteria. And what we've been finding is that they are able to remove the CSO bacteria, the fecal bacteria, introduced into the waterway, Enterococcus, E. coli, the coliform bacteria in general. They're doing a great job. So if we can get living space for these animals, they stand to do our waterway incredible service. And what they do not remove, and by the way, this is for their main food is single-celled algae, the algal blooms. So the more mussels you have, the lower the intensity of the bloom and the less damage it does. So we need to bring back these bivalves in a bigger way, both mussels and oysters. It probably will be easier to bring back the mussels first because they're already all around the place. They just need more living space.
How about you? I propose a competition between the oysters and the mussels. You have a big banner across the
She said
a great competition.
Oysters are subtidal and the mussels are intertidal.
Yeah.
So they're not competing at all.
That's right, they don't need to compete yet, but we'll just see if we can bring them back.
Question.
Yeah, I have a question for any of you. The New York Waterway just expanded their ferry service, and I'm wondering how practical would it be to have a ferry service on the Newtown Creek?
I don't think it would be that feasible. There was a proposal that came out of a design contest last year looking at possible solutions to the L train shutdown, and one of the top ideas that was popular was a ferry running from the back of English Hills. I think there's a few reasons it's not really feasible. One is that there's not a direct population that would be served by it. So, we haven't really talked about, the current state of the creek is entirely industrial except for the mouth. So, logistically speaking, you would want to put a ferry where people are going to be commuting to. And as much as, a couple of us really love the nature walk, it's not, an epicenter where people are going to come. So I think logistically it would be a low priority. The other aspect of it too is that I would really fear that it would have some negative impact on the waterway, especially because the creek is so narrow that whenever a boat goes by with any significant speed, it creates a big wake, and that creates huge disturbances for not just things like the mussels, but actually the state of the bulkheads. So it would actually create a lot more erosion. It could also create a lot more resuspension of contaminants that are at the bottom. So right now, the main traffic that's in Newtown Creek is tugs and barges, and they move incredibly slowly, which is good for not creating a lot of wake, but sometimes they also do stir up the sediment. So that's just my two thoughts. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts, but I don't think a ferry in Newtown Creek anytime soon would make a lot of sense.
But the water idea, I think, is a brilliant development, and I think it's the future, a big future for transportation in New York. I think if any of you have been regular riders in the boat, they're very disappointing with the exhaust that they kick back at you. They don't seem like they're very ecologically friendly boats regarding air quality. But I think hopefully we can encourage the communities that we live in to help develop cleaner boats. The old timers in the neighborhood used to always talk about the ferry from Greenpoint. There were two ferries, the way they told it. One went to 11th Street, I think, and the other went to 21st Street. And it went from the Greenpoint where the transmitter park is. That's where the ferry left from. And they carried cars, and that was operated right up into the 40s. So we're going back that way. I think that's the future for sure, to move massive numbers of people all around the city. So that's definitely going to keep going.
There are, there's some other interesting proposals. There's the so-called trolley car, the Brooklyn-Queens connector, which I think a lot of people have different strong opinions about. That's a potential, might have a potential crossing on Newtown Creek. There's also another interesting proposal that was put forth by Liz Crowley, which is she's a city council member in Queens, about reactivating. It's actually the line that's in the film where they're putting the trash cars onto it, and it's a MTA line that goes out to the middle of Queens, and thinking about reactivating that as a passenger line, and something like that could actually bring more people, especially to Long Island City, but even parts of the creek, The other thing I want to say real quick before I forget is that it's mentioned in the film about Riverkeeper having this visioning project, and so on June 3rd, we're going to have a day-long event that'll be in many ways a continuation of this conversation of thinking about ways that we can improve the ecology and also the access and other things like the resiliency of Newtown Creek. So if you guys are interested in Newtown Creek, it's going to be a really awesome event with a lot of knowledgeable people there and a lot of this sort of free brainstorming, so to speak. So June 3rd, mark your calendar.
Where's it going to be?
It's going to be at a really cool space. There's a photo in one of the films of it on the Kingsland Wildflower rooftop, which is right across from the wastewater treatment plant. And it's a green roof that was constructed last summer. It just opened in the fall, and it's an amazing space. So if you haven't seen it, it's a good excuse to come check it out.
How about other questions? Anybody else have a nagging concern?
Is there somebody in city planning who is a specialist in green infrastructure? Is this something that you as activists feel you have access to and input in, or do you feel like that's not generally discussed, that that's a closed door? Can somebody speak to that?
We haven't found that friendly voice per se for Friends of Bushwick Inlet Park. We've been driving a lot of the dialogue, but I would say our politicians, God bless them. Ben is here on behalf of our Councilman Levin. He has been a tremendous help for us. And so we have relationships. We've worked with all of our politicians, Steve, Joe Lenthal, State Senator Squadron, Martin DeLon, another assemblyman, Eric Adams, our borough president, God bless him, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, Nydia Velasquez. These are all people that have been our staunch allies and who have really helped us get across the finish line for Bushwick Inlet Park. So we find them to be very receptive, and they're leading the charge for us in city and state and federal government. So I think, but it rests with us. We're the ones who bug them, and send them emails and Instagrams and retweet, and we're always advocating for the neighborhood, trying to get it to be greener and more healthy.
So are you guys working together? I mean, Newtown Creek and Bushwick Inlet Park are not really that separate. They're very close, share the same land, and you have similar concerns. So are you have projects together?
Well, the Building and Oyster kind of, I think we haven't worked that, Newtown Creek Alliance has been very focused on the creek specifically, and that's not to say that we're not interested in Bushwick Inlet, but I think one of the issues is kind of to the question about agencies, is that there's a real divide between not many agencies at all look at see a connection between Bushwick Inlet Park, or Bushwick Inlet and Newtown Creek. Perhaps some people at city planning, but a lot of the issues that affect Newtown Creek are there and localized, and although they're seen other places, I think it's one of the challenges is that you have to deal with multiple agencies, and sometimes they're very centered on just one sort of thing. So back to the question about if there's someone, that's one of the challenges for Newtown Creek, is there's so many agencies involved because of the federal Superfund site, because of the industrial nature. So you have to deal with city planning, you have to deal with DEP, who brings, is the major sewage treatment plant, DEC, even agencies like NOAA and all this stuff all have a real big stake in the waterway. And so it actually makes it very difficult, even though we have some great allies in different agencies that are interested in something like green infrastructure or wetland restoration, stuff like that. It's difficult because there's so many voices in the room that there's not just one person we can turn to. So I think it's partially, there could be more collaboration. I feel like actually there could be a lot more collaboration amongst all of the, there's Bronx River Alliance, there's all these groups for all these separate little waterways around the city, be it Jamaica Bay or Coney Island Creek or whatever. And I think it would benefit the city as a whole if there was more collaboration, but unfortunately, the city deals with them on an individual basis. I talked about the plan that the DEP is doing to address the sewage in Newtown Creek. They've done that for every single little water body around the city, and so there's a real lack of communication as to what's happening to the other places and how that can impact us. So we have to do all this research about what's happening in Gowanus. It's not like DEP is coming and telling us what's happening in Gowanus. We have to ask and be proactive.
But then you've got Riverkeeper, which seems to be handling all the waterways, and you all work with Riverkeeper, and they're in New York State, basically, right? Or they're not New York State. But they seem to instigate some of the legal action.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. They're one of the main connectors, and there's other organizations like the Waterfront Alliance as well. But yeah, the Riverkeeper, it's the Hudson Riverkeeper, so their focus is on the Hudson River. And fortunately, they've branched out and they see New York City as it's part of the Hudson River estuary, so they are interested in this. But there's so many. New York City has 520 miles of shoreline, so there's so many little nooks and crannies. And there's places that, Newtown Creek and Gowanus are the only federal Superfund sites currently, but Bushwick Inlet could easily be a federal Superfund site. Part of the issue is that they haven't done a ton of testing to see how bad the contamination is. Coney Island Creek, a lot of people are pushing for that to be a federal Superfund site, even Gravesend Bay. So there's all of these, it's not like Newtown Creek is alone on a hill. There's lots of problems, and Riverkeeper's done a good job, but there's so much more opportunity to connect people.
Well, I know that, when you were talking, you said one of the things that you lack versus Gowanus is community action, and these guys are such activists, right? It seems like they're right around the corner. You got the boathouse, you have the boats, seems like you guys are connected, where you're gonna have the boats come into the Bushwick Inlet. It's a good group of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's already a lot of, I think we all know each other pretty well, but yeah, I think that's something that's valuable, is the more the local activists help, support each other's causes and see it as their own is valuable.
Just to kind of summarize what I've been thinking here, if there are people in Greenpoint and Long Island City that don't even know the Newtown Creek exists, and don't even look at the East River, don't even consider that they live in a coastal city, a coastal town, and their children grow up almost the same way. And there's so much information flying back and forth here that it should be a class in public schools in our city that just talks about environmental situations and developments going on. And hopefully, maybe with your help, our films can find their way into little niches in the community where we can do screenings in front of parents and families to bring them into the fold, into the situation. So, I mean, we could get lost in all of this information, but when you bring fresh minds that have never even considered what this city could be, it's just an amazing possibility. And that's why I always bring in children, because children can see the city as a place to live forever. And if they can hear these conversations under very supervised situations, environments, I think we're on, and all of this is like the greatest thing ever. That's all I can say.
Before we close, just finally, this Saturday, Riverkeeper is, we're working with Riverkeeper at Bushwick in the Park for the Riverkeeper Sweep. So if you want to get involved.
And on the creek.
Yeah.
Riverkeeper Sweep.
Right. But we're sweeping Bushwick in the Park at 10 o'clock, so if you want to come help us.
It's not just Bushwick Inlet, it's Transmitter, it's all the parks.
All the parks. So you can get involved Saturday morning at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yes, Rosa.
I was going to ask Sarah, because the educational component of this mentioning, and the fact that the science component of everything, the ground, the creek, is so strong. Greenpoint is like a laboratory. You could actually become like an international educational laboratory. And I was wondering if you guys collaborate with other universities around the city in some of these projects that you're involved in.
Well, this is beginning, and it's going to get a big push with a conference this October that's going to be held in the CUNY Graduate Center. And I'm going to participate in a panel there with some other colleges. The New York Marine Science Consortium is holding that day-long conference, and we will advertise it through the Newtown Creek Alliance and get it out to everybody. But yes, it is now being recognized that this is what we need to do, particularly since there's a new regional ocean plan that the DEC is promoting that involves the, of course, the estuaries as well as the ocean out to the continental shelf. So there's this big now effort to coordinate with states all along the eastern seaboard a plan of action. I think it's called the Ocean Action Plan. And different states are participating in that. That will be the umbrella conversation. But under that, we have a focus on the estuaries. And that is going to bring in a number of New Jersey institutions as well as New York institutions, SUNY, CUNY, NYU. So it is going to happen. And I will forward more of that information through Friends of Bushwick Park, Newtown Creek Alliance, and maybe folks can come join us next October. And I forget the date, so that'll be posted too.
I have to have a microphone to ask a question.
Yeah.
What's happening with the Greenpoint Library that's going to have the ecological, what is it exactly?
So the Greenpoint Library is getting a major facelift as part of the, funded by the Greenpoint Community Environmental Fund. I'm unclear personally as to how the programming is going to proceed, but the library itself is going to be 2 or 3 stories, and there's a lot of space there for, as Rosa was saying, having a place to do environmental education. I think they haven't really quite figured out how the programming is going to work, but there is going to be a cool space. There's going to be an outdoor garden on the rooftop. So people should, if they're interested, get in touch with people at Greenpoint Library to take the next step. They have to build the building first.
Yeah,
so
do you know anything about the timeline?
I think they're going to start building in the next couple of months. They're going to shut down the old library and unfortunately tear it down. It's not much to look at. But so I think the new building, the new Greenpoint Library, will be completed probably within 2 years.
Yeah.
Maybe Ben knows more.
That's what I heard.
Okay. So it's going to be a really awesome space, and yeah, I think there's a lot of potential to use that as a classroom for the schools, for organizations like ours and others, and the CUNY system to do programming there. It would also be really great if there's permanent educational material there about things like the Greenpoint oil spill that actually funded the library. That would be kind of interesting. So some cool opportunity.
One more question. Peter, are you actually starting the sewage thing, or is it just an idea?
$50,000.
Meaning,
Yes.
you need it? Do you need to keep that house up?
That's what my budget is, yeah. I mean, because it's bringing seaweed along the East River, that's for sure. And it is to have it brought into Newtown Creek and used to absorb mechanics. If that idea of doing it tomorrow is Remein, and see what happens.
Amazing idea.
It wasn't that complicated. It was done, as I say, by a friend of mine, actually a colleague of mine. She's now in LA, but she did it in Britain. We did it actually when we worked there. We
part of the DNA of this neighborhood as we grapple with these major forces of development and gentrification, the changing landscape. It was important to begin of our identity. So again, I just want to thank Rosa and Greenpoint Film Festival for keeping that going.
Thank you, Steve.
Any questions for the council member before we?
Yeah, take advantage of it.
Town hall. I just had one question about what's the next steps for Bushwick in the Park. We have the land acquisition. You don't have to say anything, you don't have to. But there's a lot of structure still on the site. Is there anything that we can say about what's happening next?
Well, the most exciting thing we have, and certainly going to let Steve have to say, but just the 50 Kent has been remediated. And so that's getting ready to be delivered to the community. And we've been talking with Parks about a way to do an interim plan for that piece of land. So we're tremendously excited. We think we have a concept that is not that expensive and is achievable in the near future. And that would be a way for us to get onto that piece of land, which is a magnificent, beautiful vantage point to see the beauty of the city and to dream on our 27 acres. So we're very, very excited about that, and that's definitely going forward. And please be in touch with us at our website, bushwick.org, and we welcome you to any of our meetings. And just keep up to date on that. That's coming online in the near future.
I gotta be honest, I was so focused on the acquisition of the city storage lot that I put all of my kind of energy into that, and it's kind of like a what now moment for me. So but I'm gonna have to dig in again and see where this is gonna be a long process. It's gonna be long. It's gonna require a lot of organizing, as Pennsylvania Park has been doing, and also it's going to be very expensive. But we are, the main, in terms of cost, the main part has been done, and I feel like at least from this mayor and any future mayor's perspective, kind of past the point of no return. They gotta make it a wonderful little park because now they own it. So, but yeah, I honestly put so much effort into that I didn't really think about what happened the day after. So onward and onward.
So where's the money coming from? You have to take out the big warehouse, and then you have to remove all those empty tanks, and so it's expensive. And then test the soil. So where is the money coming from?
It's all taxpayer dollars. And some of it is in the capital budget, and some of it's in an expense budget, and so they function in slightly different ways. Where a capital budget is part of the long-term city capital plan, which the funds can be bonded out, and so they're able to make a return on that. But in terms of stuff like environmental remediation, most of that probably won't be able to be capitally funded, and so a lot of that will be funded in the annual expense budget of the city of New York, which is sizable. This year it's about $84 billion for the whole city for everything, schools, roads, you name it. But it's going to be a mixture of capital and expense dollars, but ultimately city funded.
So they won't be going after the responsible parties like you did with 50 Cantway National Grid?
Well, some they will be if a site is under any type of jurisdiction of Superfund or for manufactured gas cleanup, that is all done through the oversight of State Department of Environmental Conservation.
The tank removal.
Yeah, I think that's you guys maybe would know better than that, but that's somebody's going to be responsible for that.
Those properties are already in the ground, with the state Superfund.
Right. So through that process, there's responsible parties, but ultimately, I think the city's going to bear some costs along the way for sure.
How long will it take?
I don't know. So I just had a daughter born a couple months ago. Thank you. But I hope that by the time she gets into middle school, her 5th grade graduation.
Maybe by the time she gets into politics.
Right.
Jeez.
I hope it's sooner than that, but it's gonna take some time because even much smaller projects take a long time. Oddly enough, the Kosciuszko Bridge project is going pretty quickly because they have a program called Design Build that is a state program that allows the design and construction of a project to be done by the same agency, and it cuts down on cost and time significantly. But Albany, they haven't authorized the city of New York to do Design Build. So I don't know.
For themselves.
But so that's why the Custom Square Bridge project has been going, took like less time than it's like repaving the McCarran Park pathways.
Yes.
We're taking other questions. Let's do 2 more questions, and I think we should probably wrap up.
Air quality.
Sure.
What's happening with the implosion of the Costuco Bridge? What's your opinion on that?
I don't know that much about it other than what actually I've heard from Willis and Christine, who's the liaison for the project, but supposedly it's going to be better than the alternative. So the alternative, I was told by Mitch Waxman, who's the Newtown Creek Alliance historian, was to basically jackhammer the thing down. So the controlled explosion supposedly will put out less debris, be quicker, and be cheaper. So there was a lot of controversy over the initial announcement, and I think a lot of the alarm around it was because it was a decision that was made without any kind of public announcement preceding it, in a project that had done a very good job of communicating with the public what all the steps were going to be. So I think it was unfortunate that it was handled the way it was in terms of the way it was publicly announced. But from my understanding, and I haven't gotten deep into the details, but from my understanding and from the people I've spoken to who are very knowledgeable about the project, is that this is actually the wise course of action.
So there'd be like an earthquake in the summer in Greenpoint.
I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
I'll just add, I think it'll be fairly minimal. They're building up these mounds to absorb the structures that are falling. And there's also a lot of misconception. It's only the approaches. The main span of the bridge that goes over the creek is going to be lowered, and I actually saw them today working on the welding of it. They're going to lower it down onto a gigantic barge and take it out for recycling, which is going to be pretty awesome. And we're cleaning up a lot of the street ends in Greenpoint so that people can see that. The explosion, so to speak, is going to be a really quick, supposedly might be 5 a.m. on a Sunday, so it's only, got to be really motivated to go see it. But I think the impacts will be pretty minimal. They have a lot of oversight mostly because of all the contamination there. Meeker Avenue plumes, the oil spill, everything else, all these pipelines that are running by. So EPA and DEC and a lot of other agencies and the fire department have, pretty tight eyes, and I feel pretty confident that the risk is minimal.
It'd be like an eclipse where you have to, like a lunar eclipse where you have to wait up to the middle.
Exactly.
Is it around 4th of July?
They don't know yet. It's going to be 6 weeks after the main span gets lowered, which will probably be the beginning of June. So I think it'll probably end up being the end of July or beginning of August will be the explosion. But the barge, I think that's going to be really cool to see this big span lowered onto a barge. So you guys should come out to the creek and check that out. Question, yeah.
Just a comment. I'm just very grateful for the filmmaking, and these are such powerful political tools, your films. And, to produce films is very complex and engaging and costly, so I hope you all find a way to really maximize, get the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak, and get those films out there, broadcast them, show them in colleges, whatever you need to do, because it's working for you. So hopefully, we all put our minds together and make sure they get a lot of exposure.
I don't know if you know, but like Friends of Bushwick in the park, they make their own videos, and that's how they got the park. Because they really they did that flash mob, and they did they filmed a lot of things, and Robert DiMaio filmed some of it, and they got it out to the community, and I think that's really what got the park far.
Wow, it's been fantastic.
You can check out a lot of our videos on our website, bushwickinthepark.org.
Is there a Facebook presence too? Or?
Yeah, we have a Facebook page as well.
Is that strong? Is it working?
Yeah, I think it's all working.
Yeah.
It worked very well.
That was their drone footage in my film.
That's nice drone footage, yeah.
That was beautiful.
Thank you, everybody, for all the great questions.
Yeah, thank you.